Katarina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katarina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review with Chris Driscoll, that's me, and Rainer Shea, that's the other guy over here. This is the episode for January 20th, 2022. A lot of twos in there, 2022. Okay. First up on the list. The U.S. isn't a nation of immigrants, so the U.S. must end. And this is... Yes?
I got the inspiration from this book.
Oh, yes.
From what I've gathered so far...
I actually started reading that after you talked about it. It's pretty good so far. I'm on like chapter 3 or chapter 4. It's very, very well done.
You know, the thing, that I think that proves what you just said, proves my perception that this is a better version of Settlers. Because what Settlers does is it observes these realities, some of them kind of told in bias of the colonial history of the white labor movements in the United States, and to try to support its narrative that whites have consistently screwed over the colonized proletariat, which is largely true. It jumps to some conclusions that are dubious in nature, and that's what turned you off. But this is more of more of an objective historical look at how colonization and erasure have defined our society. And its thesis appears to be that whereas immigrants acclimate themselves to the existing cultures, settlers seek to erase the existing cultures. They roll over the societies that they start to live in with the goal of materially benefiting at the expense of the indigenous population.
Yeah, well, that
And,
certainly happened in America.
and it's
And
happening
that's Settlers by Jay Saki is the book, the other book you were referring to.
yeah.
In case our listeners might want to actually go get it and read it to contrast.
Yeah, but
and then
yeah, but
this
I
one
think
is Not a Nation of Immigrants by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who's very, not only is it historically accurate and all that, but she's a very good writer. You know, so she kind of she has a good voice. She keeps you going. I mean, it's kind of like reading a novel there, whereas Saki is not so much. So there's that benefit as well to this book. Anyway, so the U.S. isn't a nation of immigrants, so the U.S. must end. Rainer Shea.
Yeah, it must end for the same reason that Israel must end, that the settler colonial Moroccan project must end. There's a settler colonial project we don't usually talk about, how Western Sahara has been getting colonized, apparently for the last half century, but that's only what I understand of it so far. And it's being proliferated, this settler colonization, at the behest of the imperialist powers, who are themselves largely settler colonial. Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Canada, they're both imperialist powers. And
Hawaii.
Yeah, Hawaii.
The list just goes on and on of nations that have been rolled over by settlers, basically, all for the benefit of the capitalist ruling class. So yeah, it's something to consider, and we certainly want the U.S. to end. Something better will take its place, something for all human beings, something socialist.
Yes,
that's the way I would look at it. So is that it?
Yeah, I imagine we'll cover more of this kind of stuff.
Yeah. But that's a good introduction to the whole idea. And Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz is certainly a wonderful way to get into it. I mean, there are other books, you know, some of them pretty good on this subject of settler colonialism, and you know, maybe we'll lay them all out there someday and talk about them all at once. But these are two examples, and Dunbar Ortiz certainly has the better example in many ways. So next on the list is topic number 2, the new class war. Now, let me see where I'm at here. Let me get way down the list here to get this. Hold on a sec. Okay. This is an article by Chris Hedges, and I'm just looking to see here if I can find it. I got it in popularresistance.org, which is a news aggregating site that was founded by an old friend of mine, Kevin Zeese, and his companion, Margaret. And Kevin died last year, unfortunately, of an early heart attack. I mean, the guy was he was about 60 or somewhere around there when he died. But anyway, this article is by Chris Hedges. I saw the article in a couple of different locations, but Popular Resistance is the one that I've taken it from. So we'll name that one. And he says, there is one last hope for the United States. It does not lie in the ballot box. It lies in the union organizing and strikes by workers at Amazon, Starbucks, Uber, Lyft, John Deere, Kellogg, the Special Metals plant in Huntington, West Virginia, owned by Berkshire Hathaway, the Northwest Carpenters Union, Kroger, it's the grocery store, teachers in Chicago, West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Arizona, fast food workers, hundreds of nurses in Worcester, Massachusetts, and the members of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. Organized workers, often defying their timid union leadership, are on the march across the United States. Over 4 million workers, about 3% of the workforce, mostly from the accommodation and food services, healthcare, and social assistance, transportation, housing, and utilities, have walked away from jobs, rejecting poor pay, along with punishing and risky working conditions. There is a growing consensus, 68% in the most recent Gallup poll, with that number climbing to 77% of those between the ages of 18 and 34, that the only way left to alter the balance of power and force concessions from the ruling capitalist class is to mobilize and strike, although only 9% of the US workforce is unionized. Forget the woke Democrats. This is class war. And as Chris Hedges points out, this is the only way. This is the way forward. And workers really are on the march right now in a new class war. So what are your thoughts?
Chris Hedges is somebody with, I think, exceptional prose, exceptional abilities to describe things, particularly class war. He's been something of an inspiration for me, but I've had to realize at some point that the agenda he's pushing is not Marxism, Leninism.
No, it's not. Chris is not a Marxist-Leninist. Chris is a reformist, plain and simple. And this is an example of an area where reformists and Marxist-Leninists can agree. We all agree. We all agree that that when 3% of the entire workforce is out on strike, marching in the streets, and some of these people from traditionally unorganized sectors like Lyft and Uber and let's see, what are some of the others? Amazon and Starbucks, and those are traditionally unorganized sectors of the economy. You also have John Deere, which is heartland, industrial working class kind of job. Kellogg, Special Metals plant in Huntington, the Carpenters Union, Kroger's, grocery workers who've been organized for about a century now. So it's a mix of traditionally organized and those who have been unorganized up till now, out marching. And this is really a thrilling event after the last 40 years of defeat after defeat after defeat after defeat. We are ready for some victories. And these working class people are bringing those victories to us. This is a thrilling event. It really is.
Well, hopefully this doesn't turn into another reset of capitalism like happened the last time worker mobilization exploded like this. But I don't think that capitalism is able to reset like it did during the New Deal. I don't think Joe Biden will be able to become the new FDR because the current conditions don't allow for a new FDR to come.
Yeah.
What's going to happen is intensifying class conflict. The ruling class is going to double down, and the masses are going to gain the political experience from that necessary to join with the revolutionaries rather than the reformists.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a learning experience one way or another. We'll see how it goes. There's not a lot of wiggle room there. The capitalists don't have the same kind of maneuverability that they once had. They're between a rock and a hard place. I mean, the falling rate of profit that Marx predicted a century and a half ago is coming to that ultimate symptomatic point that it reaches towards zero, and the capitalists no longer have the wiggle room that they once had to give concessions to workers. So this is going to turn out to be a real fight, and this is just the beginning. There's also not just something that Chris didn't really talk much about is the Great Resignation, where millions and millions of workers are simply resigning from their crappy, low-paid jobs. This is the McDonald's and Burger King and so forth are crying that they cannot get workers because workers just keep quitting on them. So this is another aspect of the class struggle in the way that it's taking place today. And yes, you are absolutely correct. Workers will learn something out of this, no matter what, but especially if the capitalist class remains as intransigent as it has been in recent decades, we will see a real class struggle here, or we are seeing a real class struggle here. Next on the list, the Jakarta Method, preserving capitalism through terror. Rainer Shea.
That's where what we were just talking about leads into, because through the Jakarta Method, the capitalist class is capable of killing hundreds of thousands, millions of people if necessary, if they deem it necessary, to suppress revolution. In Indonesia, they killed hundreds of thousands in the first year of the dictatorship alone. And
that was in 1965.
Yes, and communism is still illegal, non-existent. Communist organizing, at least, is non-existent in Indonesia because of the legacy of this dictatorship and the legacies of the dictatorships that were created pretty much all throughout Latin America. And now in places like Colombia, we see state terror intensifying anew. And this is happening all throughout the global South, or at least the global South that remains under neo-colonial rule. Repression, surveillance, torture, extrajudicial killings, paramilitarism, the horrific, world-shocking tactics that Colombia employed last year against the anti-austerity protesters, tactics that included shooting people through helicopters. These are the kinds of methods that are going to be employed when the class struggle comes to a head, when the capitalist class gets desperate enough. And we need to not underestimate our enemy. We need to really take the revolutionary mindset seriously, which is to say, get prepared for the kind of scenario you can read about in the book, The Jakarta Method by Vincent Bevins. This is another book I have. This describes scenarios where the Indonesian dictatorship and its parallel dictatorships in Latin America were seizing people, quietly disposing of them. They didn't want to have bodies literally piling up in the streets, and throwing the executed people either in the ocean, like under the infamous Pinochet dictatorship, or in the rivers. Rivers were getting clogged up with bodies. These are the kinds of atrocities I've read about. And we need to figure out our game plans for how to survive a purge like that, how to survive the kinds of anti-communist purges that have taken place in Nazi Germany, Indonesia, Argentina, Brazil, Guatemala, Chile, Peru, Bolivia. All of these places are preludes to what could easily happen within the United States. The fascist movement here is already growing. It's gaining steam through the legacy of January 6th.
Yeah. The Jakarta Method really was an impactful book. I read it last year, or maybe the year before that. But I've read several books actually about this incident, about the mass murder of 1 million people in Indonesia. Prior to 1965, Indonesia had the second largest communist party in the world. They had more than 1 million people in the Communist Party, and in 1965, the Communist Party was literally wiped out. 1 million people murdered. I mean, this is mass murder on a scale that we can't imagine, and yet it happened in Indonesia in 1965. And Indonesia has been was changed forever after that. They still don't have a communist party, as you mentioned. They really don't have much of a radical movement of any kind in Indonesia today. It's one of the rare cases in a third world country where that exists. And that same Jakarta Method, as Bevins talks about, is being applied around the world. And it will be applied in America when the time comes. So we really need to organize and fight for socialist revolution. That's the solution. That's the answer to this. Because anything short of that, like any kind of reformist, Chris Hedges kind of approach, will not stop this, what the capitalist, imperialist, global system has in store for us. It just will not. The only thing that will stop it is genuine socialist revolution that overthrows the capitalist class and installs a socialist workers' state to take the place of the capitalist state. Next on the list, Biden tightens the noose around China. The term containment never comes up, writes Michael T. Clare, but nonetheless, here is the new 21st century Cold War on a planet desperately in need of something else. The word encirclement does not appear in the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, signed into law by President Joe Biden on December 27th, or in another recent administration statement about its foreign policy and military policies, nor does the classic Cold War era term containment ever come up. Still, America's top leaders have reached a consensus on a strategy to encircle and contain the latest great power, China, with hostile military alliances, thereby thwarting its rise to full superpower status. The gigantic 2022 defense bill, passed with overwhelming support from both parties, provides a detailed blueprint for surrounding China with a potentially suffocating network of US bases, military forces, and increasingly militarized partner states. The goal is to enable Washington to barricade that country's military inside its own territory and potentially cripple its economy in any future crisis. For China's leaders, who surely can't tolerate being encircled in such a fashion, it is an open invitation to, well, there's no point in not being blunt, fight their way out of containment. Like every defense, let me just finish up. It won't take too much longer. Like every defense bill before it, the $768 billion 2022 NDAA is replete with all too generous handouts to the military contractors for favored Pentagon weaponry. That would include the F-35 jet fighters, Virginia-class submarines, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, and a wide assortment of guided missiles. But as the Senate Armed Services Committee noted in a summary of the bill, it also incorporates an array of targeted appropriations and policy initiatives aimed at encircling, containing, and someday potentially overpowering China. Among these is an extra $7.1 billion for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, or PDI, a program initiated last year with the aim of bolstering US and allied forces in the Pacific. Nor are these just isolated items in that 2,186-page bill. The Authorization Act includes a sense of Congress measure focused on defense alliances and partnerships in the Indo-Pacific region, providing a conceptual blueprint for such an encirclement strategy. Under it, the Secretary of Defense is enjoined to strengthen the United States defense alliances and partnerships in the Indo-Pacific region, so as to further the comparative advantage of the United States in strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. That the 2022 Defense Authorization Act, National Defense Authorization Act, passed with no significant opposition in the House or Senate, suggests that support for these and similar measures is strong in both parties. Some progressive Democrats had indeed sought to reduce the size of the military spending, but their colleagues on the House and Senate Armed Services committees instead voted to increase this year's already staggering allotment for the Pentagon by another $24 billion, specifically to better contain or fight China. Most of these added taxpayer dollars will go towards a creation of hypersonic missiles and other advanced weaponry aimed at the PRC, and increased military exercises and security cooperation with U.S. allies in the region. For Chinese leaders, there can be no doubt about the meaning of all this. Whatever Washington might say about peaceful competition, the Biden administration, like the Trump administration before it, has no intention of allowing the PRC to achieve parity with the United States on the world stage. In fact, it is prepared to employ every means, including military force, to prevent that from happening. This leaves Beijing with two choices: succumb to the US pressure and accept second-class status in world affairs, or challenge Washington's strategy of containment. It's hard to imagine that country's current leadership accepting the first choice, while the second choice, were it adopted, would surely lead sooner or later to armed conflict.
I wonder why they aren't using those old types of rhetoric, why they seem to be trying to obscure their goals, while at the same time driving forward with those goals even more aggressively than they did the last time. It's something that we're going to have to analyze for decades, I think. The nature of U.S. imperialism, the behavior of U.S. imperialism when faced with these compromising circumstances where China is creating a multipolar world. What's the purpose of trying to obscure this reality? It's not
reason I would say the reason that they're trying to obscure it is that the American public today is not the American public of the early 1960s. In the early 1960s, anti-communism was something that most Americans swallowed with, swallowed like the poison pill in a cult. America was like a cult back then. Today's America is far different. I mean, 1/3 of all youth say that they're communists, and 50% of youth say that they're socialist, and another 40% of the American public say that 40% of the entire American public say that they're socialist. Under those circumstances, the American war apparatus has to use different tactics than they used in the 60s. They can't come out and say, yeah, we're going to go out there and surround these commies. Most people think that China is, pretty good people. They're just out there working hard and producing commodities to sell, and they want to sell it everywhere. They want to be friends with everybody. They don't want to attack anybody. There's a whole lot of Americans that think that way. So, they can't put it in in terms of we're going to go out and surround and choke China.
Yeah, and there's another side to this. There's another side to this progress we've had in terms of the consciousness of the masses, because it's clear that most Americans are still willing to accept the propaganda about the Uyghur genocide, about China oppressing Hong Kong and Taiwan. These are the essential myths that most people, as of now, aren't willing to give up. And maybe my perception of this is colored by the fact that I'm deeply involved in discourse about this. I'm involved in the facets of this debate that are most vitriolic, most toxic, most fanatical, the types of people who have the most to gain from proliferating these anti-Chinese narratives are the people I more often encounter than the average person does. So maybe my pessimism is a bit biased.
Yeah, well, those people are certainly out there. There are Americans who swallow all that bullshit and spew it out. But there are a lot of other people in America who don't swallow that bullshit. So, it's progress. To me, I look and I see great progress, but I'm a lot older than you are, so I've experienced a different reality. I've experienced the reality where the whole fucking country hated Russia, hated the Soviet Union, wanted to stamp out the Soviet Union. I mean, we were ready for nuclear war, when I was a young man. And things have changed quite a bit since then. Are there still right-wing asswipes like Trump and the Trumpsters? Yes, of course. Enough to elect a president, although it only takes like a quarter of the people to elect a president, so it's not that big a deal, I mean, half of us don't vote. So, that only leaves the other half who are voting, and half of that half vote for the other assholes, the Democrat assholes. So really a quarter of the American adult population can elect a president and do, and those are the people who are, who you're running into apparently, who really still hate communism and hate China, and they still even hate Russia, even though Russia hasn't been communist since 1991. So they still think that Russia is communist. That's why they go along with all this anti-Russia shit. Anyway, next on the list, settler psychology and the ignorance of racism's structural nature. And this is also by Rainer Shea. So take it away, Rainer.
Another book I'm reading right now is Black Skin, White Masks by Frantz Fanon. And in this book, he argues against the liberal argument that in a place like South Africa, for instance, racism is the product of colonial settler workers who have been feeling undercompensated and merely want somebody to blame. Fanon, with his Marxist analysis, thinks that's too individualistic of an interpretation of racism. He comes at it from the framework that South Africa is a racist socioeconomic structure. So was the case for all of the other colonial states, whether settler colonial or in the original imperialist countries. And therefore, racism springs from this socioeconomic racial inequity. And these are the kinds of realities that our society is based around rejecting. which gets into fascism, the analysis of Umberto Eco. He said that the consistent facet of fascists is hostility towards intellectualism, towards learning. They don't want to think, they just want to hate, to have an animating force, to have a force to animate their anger and hatred. And they hate intellectuals because of this. So their whole reactionary ideology is based around rejecting realities of systemic racism, realities of the causes of society's crises. They want to aggressively stamp out any analysis of the colonial question, of the reality of the United States' role as the core of global imperialism. They want to wipe out all of these intellectual questions and replace it with pure base emotions. And we need to overcome this by not giving into their anti-intellectualism. We need to keep pushing the line that the United States needs to be abolished through arguments like the one I've gotten from that other book, the argument about how the U.S. isn't a nation of immigrants.
Yeah, well put, well put. I couldn't have said it better, and I don't have anything more to add. Next on the list, Pepe Escobar and the Grayzone. Kazakhstan coup fails. U.S.-Russia talks go nowhere. Is war on the horizon? Now, this is a video that the Grayzone put out interviewing Pepe Escobar. And of course, Pepe Escobar is one of my favorites. He's a Brazilian journalist, but he gets around. He's every time I see, he's in a different part of the world, and he writes some really good stuff. So it was a pretty interesting interview. In this video, Max Blumenthal of the Grayzone and geopolitical analyst Pepe Escobar discussed the violent coup attempt in Kazakhstan and its crucial importance as an ally of Russia and the center of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Pepe addresses US and Turkish meddling and why this massive and misunderstood country is suddenly at the heart of the new Cold War. They also talk about the failure of US-Russia talks in Geneva and if war could be on the horizon. So that's Pepe Escobar. We'll have a link up to that. It'll be under this video when we put it up. And so we hope that all of you out there listening and viewing this show will take the time to take a look at that Grayzone interview with Pepe Escobar.
I do plan to look at it because I need to get a deep understanding of the machinations of the color revolution machine within Central Eurasia. It's clear that the imperialists are pushing for another Euromaidan revolution within Kazakhstan. They want to create a new fascist state in the region, a new proxy war vehicle to counter Russia and potentially China as well. And if they can't do this to China's northwestern province of Xinjiang, then they'll try to do it to Kazakhstan. This all ties in with what we've been talking about, the prevalence of anti-Russian, anti-Chinese psyops and at the same time, the deliberate attempts at obfuscation and concealment when it comes to the machinations of the new Cold War. They're not calling it a new Cold War. They're acting like they're responding proportionately in all of these cases to what they call a rising block of autocracies. What I need to try to do is dissect all of these deceptions, pull back that big lie and all of the lies that go along with it.
Yeah. Next and final on the list is the settler blindness to the U.S. empire's internal violence. Rainer Shea.
There is a blindness that's cultivated among settlers to the violence that pervades their surroundings. They're sheltered relatively from the very worst types of violence that capitalism brings, which is settler colonial violence, racist violence, imperialist violence. Whites have that little bit of privilege that can make a lot of difference in shaping their consciousness. And we see this in stories like the one from 1968, where at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, a group of white activists sought to descend upon the convention to participate in the days of rage against the leadership of the Democratic Party. But the Black Panthers of Chicago were urging these white people to not participate in the unrest because the subsequent police crackdown would overwhelmingly target the Black community in Chicago. What did the whites do? They made a point of refusing to listen to the Black community, and in response, this is a wild story. Fred Hampton punched the face of Mark Rudd, one of the weathermen who was leading the charge in this attempt to blatantly disrespect the wishes of the Black community. And this naturally led to increased tensions between the Panthers and the weathermen. There's an interesting interview in an article in Salon that I found that was quoting this. No, actually, I think it's from a book. Anyway, it was quoting an ex-weatherman who was describing the Panthers as having been paranoid in the coming months and years towards the weathermen, towards the SDS. They were saying that the Panthers were behaving unfairly towards them. And they recounted a story where the Panthers had stormed their offices and made off with their printer and kicked one of the weathermen down the stairs when they went to the Panthers office to confront them about it. And given that context, you'd think that the Panthers were the ones in the wrong. But when you look at the broader situation, not just within that crazy little saga, but within the whole history of racism in this country, it's clear that the whites had provoked the Panthers into war, despite their claiming at the same time, paradoxically, that they had nothing but respect for the Panthers. Despite this claim to have respected the Panthers, and maybe they even believed that they respected the Panthers, Mark Rudd would apparently admit in 2013 in an interview that we refused to listen to the people on the ground because we were racist. So he recognized that racial chauvinistic part of himself that caused him to get punched for willingly endangering the Black community with his adventurism. These are the kinds of pitfalls that white people can succumb to should they lack the humility to recognize the mental poison that settlerism has the potential to put inside of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Something seems to be wrong with my camera. Yeah. Are you seeing me?
No.
No. Well, this is the last point. So, yeah, I used to know Mark. He's a pretty good guy.
Good.
He when I lived in New Mexico, he was in that's where he still lives, I believe. But he grew a lot after those days. And, you know, as you say, he admitted we were racist back then. And it was a kind of unconscious racism that they were not aware that they had, but they had a lot of growing to do. I mean, they were young men back in those days, you know. I mean, that I can't remember exactly how old Mark would be, but he was somewhere in his early to mid 20s, something like that. So they were still pretty young men. When I knew Mark, he was reading the collected works of Stalin. So he was learning a lot about how to absorb the lessons of oppressed nationalities and to really respect what oppressed nationalities are all about. Because of course Stalin was the expert at that. I mean, Stalin wrote one of the earliest books about this subject, about oppressed nationalities, minority nationalities. So yeah, he was learning and growing and becoming a real communist, you know. In other words, becoming a person who understood what settler colonialism is all about. So, yeah, but he was a pretty good guy when I knew him. Anyway, those were some really you know, tumultuous times, and times when it certainly would have been better had those people been more communist at that point, those young white people, and understood the kind of internal racism that they had grown up with, that they still had not grown out of. So we live and we learn. Anyway, that's it for tonight. Please join us next week for more of the same. And until then, I bid you all a sweet adieu.